Hey everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Just wanted to get some plugs out of the way before the new episode starts. We have now come under the umbrella of Fandom Lib Media, which is also the home of the Table Reads podcast, which is a fellow unproduced script podcast, where they read said scripts out in full over several episodes. So if you like this subject matter and you're curious about a different format for it, definitely check those guys out. Not the least reason which is because you'll be paying tribute to my new podcast overlords, and that can only have a benefit. Also, check out the Shelved Film Podcast, which covers similar subject matters. They're not tied in with us, but I want you to go check them out. I want to make that recommendation because I'm just a nice guy like that. And as usual, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. We're on almost every means of listening to podcasts. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, a bunch of other places, especially now that I'm on a new platform which can distribute it to a whole ton of different places. So be sure to check out Spotify, Google Podcasts, stuff like that as well. And also a couple of things I want to throw in at the end. We do have a Patreon page. There's not much there. I can't really think of a rewards tier at the moment. And also, I have a Discord server that's been put together for a while, so if you want to show up and try that, as long as you're not an asshole, nothing will happen to you. You won't get kicked out. Just follow the rules. You'll be good. Check that link out down below. And with that, enjoy the episode. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead, and tonight I'm bringing you a new episode that will be focusing on the unproduced versions of Rambo 4, part of the classic action franchise headlined by Sylvester Stallone. And this was a project that was in development for 20 years, actually, before a fourth movie finally came out. And a bunch of different ideas were sort of pitched back and forth, and I'm going to be covering 3 of them here. Now, before we get into that, I just want to go into a quick bit of background on the franchise to give you an idea of my sort of history with it. Now, I came to it through First Blood specifically, because the first movie is First Blood, and this is the first one I really sat down and watched. And it was one I had seen on TV when I was very young, and then later on I went back to it and gave it a real watch. And it was a movie that I just thought was really, really good. And it has Stallone playing the character of John Rambo, who's this troubled veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the situation he finds himself in having to deal with these cops in Washington State. And it was a really smart, really interesting movie with some good action in it. And it was a really good character piece. And Stallone's emotional breakdown at the end was just this really strong acting moment that I've always kind of admired from him. I always thought that was a really great scene that showed what he could do. And the sequels, I kind of saw in like a bizarre order because for some reason, I can't remember why. The first one I saw was 4, which was just called Rambo. And I picked it up at random as like a $5 DVD. And I watched it that way. And I can't even remember the hows and the whys that happened. But I didn't see Rambo 2 until much later. And the first time I watched it, Rambo First Blood Part 2, because this series has like the weirdest titling scheme this side of the Fast and the Furious. Now, it was one when I first saw it, it didn't quite hit me the way I think it hit a lot of people. I think I was expecting more action, or I was maybe expecting it to be a little bit more like First Blood, so it left me kind of cold, a little bit disappointed. But it's one that's grown on me slowly over the years, and I've come to appreciate it more and more. And hey, any movie that's got Stallone blowing shit up with explosive arrows can't be all bad, right? So yeah, that is actually a pretty good movie. I do think it stumbles a little bit. Like, I don't think the speech at the end is anywhere near as good as the speech in First Blood, and I don't think it quite hits the same way. I don't think the message quite hits the same way, especially being so far removed from what it's talking about. But I do quite like that movie overall. You got like that cool finale with the helicopters, you got the explosive arrows, you got him fucking guys up, blows one guy up with arrows, and you see his guts go flying everywhere. That's really cool. Now, Rambo 3, I saw that, and I know this is one that has one of those reputations because of the storyline it chose. It didn't age particularly well, especially after 9/11, the whole Afghanistan thing. Although I don't know why Rambo 3 gets tarred and feathered for it and The Living Daylights doesn't. Like, everyone's fine with the Bond movie doing that, but the Rambo movie doesn't. It's like, fuck you. I really, really like Rambo 3. It's an incredible over-the-top action movie. It's what I was kind of expecting from First Blood Part 2 when I saw it the first time. Like, this was what I would have expected from Rambo 2, and just amped it up times a million, because you got all this crazy shit. You've got, Rambo doing all kinds of things in this movie, like blowing shit up, like killing tons of dudes. Like him and Colonel Troutman, they go and like take on almost an entire army almost entirely by themselves at the end. And you got Rambo fucking jousting with a tank against a helicopter. Stupid as hell, but it's awesome. So yeah, that one's really good. And then it took, like I said, it took 20 years for a Rambo 4 to come out, during which I'll go over a bunch of that development as we go ahead. But when we did finally get one in 2008, it was just called Rambo in the US, and in some overseas territories, they called it John Rambo, because, like I said, the series has the weirdest titles ever. And that one was so cool seeing it for the first time, because once again, it was not exactly what you expected, because it brought in the action of 2 and 3, but took more of the tone of First Blood and kind of mixed those two things together, and just made a really brutal, gut-wrenching movie that's almost a horror movie, really, in terms of, the stuff that it's showing the Burmese army doing. And it just builds and builds. It's a good little story, has some nice little character moments for Rambo in it. And it just builds up to that insane climax where he gets behind the 50 caliber. And I'm like, if Burma even has an army by the end of that movie, I would be shocked, because he shreds so many guys to pieces with that thing. It's like, damn, that's the scene that everybody talks about with that movie, and for good reason, because you look at that and it's just like, holy shit, like it just stops the movie, and you can't think about anything other than that. If I have a criticism of that movie in particular, it's that it always feels kind of short. Like, it's a movie that has like a 90-something minute runtime, but I swear that like 10, 15 minutes of that runtime are closing credits. Like, the movie just suddenly ends. It's like, oh, come on, I want a little bit more at least. But no, overall, the Rambo 4 we got was really, really good. And then, against all expectations, they eventually made a Rambo 5, which was Rambo Last Blood. Came out last year, 2019, almost exactly a year ago now. Like, it's only like a month off. And that one is one where I enjoy the movie okay, but I can kind of see the criticisms of it a little more. Like when people say it doesn't necessarily feel like a Rambo movie, it feels more like Stallone doing his version of Taken and just calling the main character Rambo. I do think that's fair, and I do think he could have done a little bit more with it to like make it, fit in a little bit more of the Rambo sort of mythos, like used a little bit more of the iconography. Like, I get why the character doesn't have long hair in the movie because of the position he's at, but like maybe have him wear the bandana for the finale, maybe bring in the explosive arrows, because that was in the early draft of the script and then they just didn't use them. But that's a story for another time. But it's a little bit more of the action, because the movie really toned down the action side of things. And like some of the plotting is a little bit silly. Like some of the stuff with the girl who gets kidnapped and why she goes off to Mexico and gets kidnapped felt like it was overcomplicating the narrative a little bit. But overall, I thought it was a pretty decent little action movie. Would I prefer they would have just ended it with the ending of 4? Sure. But I didn't feel like it detracted from the franchise that much. And I feel like it's a movie where it had some nuances that even film critics kind of just ignored. But no, Last Blood I thought was a fairly decent entry. It just wasn't everything it could have been. Now, to get into the meat of the episode, Rambo 4 was something that was on and off in development for 2 decades, and there was times where Stallone was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. No, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not sure. And to sort of give the information that I have at my fingertips, the first, version that was mentioned was that Stallone talked about a 4th film where he would work with Greenpeace fighting nature criminals. And the story would have involved either an oil spill or it would have taken place on an oil rig platform. And that it was in an issue of the movie magazine Impact, it was subtitled Black Forest. Now, of course, I'm getting all this information from a document that was provided to me by Jack Craven, whom you'll see in the comments on YouTube videos. He's a good, source of information, a good colleague, good friend. So, shout out to him. This version, and when I first read this document he sent me, I was like, oh boy, this version It sounds a lot like On Deadly Ground to me. Now, I have no doubt that Stallone would have made a better movie than Steven Seagal did there. But I mean, I'm just getting this mental image because Stallone likes to give Rambo those ending speeches. And I've just got this mental image of Rambo showing up to the state capitol and giving a 15 fucking minute monologue about the environment that just gets crazier and crazier as it goes along. And I'm like, I'm sure he wouldn't have done that, but I just have that in the back of my head, like, oh no. And he has to have like a spiritual awakening like Steven Seagal in that movie and Homer Simpson in the Simpsons movie. But, maybe that could have been okay. But that was in 1990, roughly thereabouts. And then 1993, he was interviewed in Starlog, and he mentioned another storyline where he said it would have been about Rambo returning home, but he is kicked out due to his reputation. However, he returns once some criminals, which his brother, the town sheriff, sent to jail, escape and come to town to kill him, at the same time when a hurricane hits it, and Rambo also comes back to save him. Now, as was pointed out in the document, and I thought this the first time I read this, I was like, this sounds exactly like Gale Force, which was a Stallone project at Carolco that Rennie Harlan was supposed to direct. And it was about a guy who comes back to his hometown and gets caught up in a hurricane, and these criminals come in to rob the place, and he has to stop them. And it sounds a lot like that, only he replaced the main character with Rambo. In fact, in that script as well, it was the main character's brother was the sheriff. Now, I can see that working for a Rambo movie, but you would have to really heavily rewrite it even from that premise. Because first of all, who the fuck do you get to play the brother of Rambo? Really? That's just the first thing that comes to mind. And also, Rambo's hometown is in Arizona, which doesn't have a coast, so it doesn't get hurricanes. So I don't know how you'd pull that off. Maybe that was why he went against this idea. And next up, in 1997, Scott Rosenberg was hired to write a script, and in this way it was Rambo versus a right-wing militia. The story was about Rambo infiltrating the militia so that he can stop them from blowing up a federal building, and apparently Stallone wanted to bring the Sheriff Teasel character from First Blood back into the series here. And, the Brian Dennehy character. And that's a theme that will crop up later in the episode. And I've heard, mixed things about this. I've heard he would be a bad guy. I've heard he would be an ally to Rambo. Both of those could conceivably work, but I'd have to see the script to see, how it would turn out. It's okay. And also, it's kind of funny that the last episode I recorded was Halloween 6, and we got the brother of Phil Rosenberg. We got Scott Rosenberg in this episode. We had his brother in the last one. Go figure. And then 98, J.D. Zake, the writer of Ronin, was hired to write a script for the film, and David Morrell was on board as a consultant. And in this one, Rambo's former comrade from Vietnam and double agent, who is now either member or leader of a white supremacy group, kidnaps Rambo's wife and child out of revenge. And that just has you going, who married Rambo? I'm trying to see where that would fit in. I'm like, who has the fucking stones to marry Rambo? That's just a fascinating little piece of info there. And this would have been at Dimension, because Dimension picked up the rights to Rambo, and that's just kind of, I'm glad that it wasn't Dimension eventually, because it would not have gone well. Then in 2000, a new script was written, and once again it was by Scott Rosenberg, only this time he was co-writing with Stallone. And this version was Rambo battling drug dealers, and the main villain, multimillionaire drug lord, would have been played by Jackie Chan, who didn't want to play a villain, so it was later rewritten so that after fighting against Rambo in the first half, the two of them would join up and they would go after other bad guys. That sounds possibly interesting. The idea of Jackie Chan playing a bad guy is fascinating because he's never really done that. But just seeing Stallone and Jackie Chan together is one of those long-term things that just has never happened despite them trying several times. I know that Jackie Chan, he was Stallone's first choice to play Simon Phoenix in Demolition Man. And once again, Chan didn't want to play a villain, so that didn't happen. It's hard to see Jackie Chan in that role after Wesley Snipes did it, but it's kind of an interesting idea. So that does lend credence to him not wanting to be the bad guy in Rambo 4. And from what I understand, the reasoning behind this is that the Chinese audience doesn't like seeing the big superstars like Jackie Chan branch out and play different characters that they're not known for. And so he would have vastly alienated his native fan base. That's what I've read in other places. I could be wrong, I mean, they could have been full of shit when they said that, but that's the information I've seen. I mean, Rambo going after drug dealers, I mean, they make good bad guys, so maybe that could work. And Jackie Chan, but yeah, like, there's several times there was this. I think Jackie Chan was supposed to take a part in Expendables 3, but that didn't go as planned. He may have been invited to do in the other Expendables movies for all I know, because there's a bunch of actors he reached out to who would never do it. Like, I know Kurt Russell was another one who said no, which is a shame. And then, like, later on, like, more recently, there was that movie that was announced that was called Ex-Baghdad that they were going to do together. And then Stallone stepped away from it, and it was going to be John Cena, and nothing has been heard about it for years now. So that's another missed opportunity of Jackie Chan working with Stallone. So I would like to see them eventually do something together. And so going on to 2001 to 2004, after 9/11s, there were plans and maybe a couple versions of the script in which Rambo would fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan, and maybe even the same place where he was in the third film. And around 2004, there were plans for a fourth film to have Rambo tracking down lost nuclear weapons. Those weapons of mass destruction. Man, if Rambo can't find them, no one can. And fighting Al-Qaeda terrorists, but this went nowhere because Stallone wanted the story of the fourth film to be tied with Troutman's death. And apparently Robert Rodriguez was involved as the director around this time. And also around this time, like throughout like this whole early 2000s era, like Luc Besson's name was attached, I guess, to the Jackie Chan version. Maybe the Holy War version, which I'm about to talk about in a second. Also reading here that John McTiernan was approached to direct, but turned it down, and that he chose to do Die Hard 4 instead, and he didn't do that. As we all know, he went to prison. And okay, so that leads us into the Holy War treatment, which was written around this time. Now, what this version is that this is a version where Rambo is working as the premise is that he works as a. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to read the premise from the first page of the treatment after the long table of contents. This thing is 33 pages long, and only something like 4 or 5 pages of this thing is actually synopsis of what the story is. It's all like really like in-depth, like summarizing the series, like business propositions, possible casting. Like this is almost more of a pitch document by this group called Alpha One Media than it is a proper treatment. Like there's no author attached to it. Like it really seems like this company wanted to do this version of a Rambo story, and so they pitched it to the guys involved, and I guess they said no. But it's dated July of 2004, and there are previous versions listed on the title page from, apparently the concept came about in July 2001. The first version was October 2003, and the second version was February 2004. And this is a UK-based company called Alpha One Media that put this together. Now, the concept, they say, is Rambo Holy War is a 21st century action-adventure film, simultaneously a potent development in the Rambo saga, and an enhanced high-concept action thriller in the vein of The Rock, Mission Impossible 2, because that's something you want to be compared to, the Die Hard trilogy, because remember there was only 3 at this time, and the Mission Kashmir. Now, if you don't know what that is a Indian drama thriller action movie that they seem to be really interested in, that I had never heard of before this, and I looked it up, and it seems to have gotten fairly decent reviews. But I haven't gotten around to watching it yet, but they seem really high on that movie. And so continuing on, Vietnam vet John J. Rambo is now working as an environmentalist at the United Nations when the UN Assembly is hijacked by sadistic Islamist terrorists who hold the world to ransom. Rambo tries to take the terrorists down, knowing that his Afghani adopted son Tomask is part of the terrorist mission. So that's the setup, and they say the theme is that the film is based on the notion that mankind is one, split into many different nations and peoples who must work together for peace and justice. Rambo is one of the world's most highly decorated soldiers, but what he values most is his family, spiritual truth, development issues such as global poverty and the natural environment, and working for the betterment of mankind as a whole. Moreover, Rambo will try to understand, as a Vietnam veteran, the results of the arrogance of power in U.S. foreign policy warned by former U.S. Senator J. William Fulbright during the Vietnam period. The film will try to answer why, at the start of the 21st century, the USA's super military machine has not prevented it from now feeling more vulnerable than ever to outside attack, and why its government's foreign policy history is condemned around the world. In particular, the movie will educate the audience about Islam, a faith shared by 1.5 billion people on Earth, and will show the importance of interfaith tolerance. So they are actually aiming kind of high with the themes they want to tackle here, and that's an admirable goal, really, when you think about it. And their pitch is that they say our aim is to utilize iconic actors of the Western film industry, such as Sylvester Stallone, with iconic actors from the East to create a global-oriented blockbuster action film with trans-market appeal. And they mentioned that this is timely because of the Indian actor who was cast in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I'm like, maybe take that out, considering that film wasn't a huge hit. And the topic of Islamist terrorism versus American unilateralism thought that the seat of world government will be highly educational and topical. Neither can emerge the victor. And I don't really see that in the storyline they put together here, but I'll talk about that. And they say the immediate potential, domestic and international grosses, emphasis on international, which that's kind of what they've been doing with China for a while now in Hollywood. So interesting that these guys kind of got to that idea sooner. Critical acclaim for creating an intelligent and topical blockbuster of transcultural appeal. I don't quite know about that based on the synopsis. And franchise potential for Rambo and Rambo's son. So you can do like a Son of Rambo movie to follow it up. That's what they're talking about. Now, to get into the meat of the treatment, it says that the basic premise is that after Rambo 3, Rambo returned to the U.S. and started working as an environmentalist for the United Nations, which they don't say what exactly he does, but okay. Where he met and then married Dr. Michal, an environmental lawyer. And this is so once again, we're going with Rambo's wife. And the proposed casting in the document is Madeline Stowe, whom I can actually see her doing the wife of Rambo thing about as well as anyone could, because she's got a real strength and solid screen presence to her and stuff like, especially in stuff like Last of the Mohicans and 12 Monkeys. I can see her doing this about as well as anybody could. And they eventually visited Pakistan and adopted Tomask, the Afghan boy from Rambo 3, and went home to New York together. And years later, after 9/11, Tomask left home to help in refugee camps in Pakistan, but what really happened was he was radicalized and he joined a terrorist group. And the main action starts in 2004 to 2005, soon after the election of the new UN Secretary General Amit Talian, who they say is the first Indian Secretary General. And going up to the cast list here, I'm going to butcher this guy's real name. Amitabh Bachchan. And my apologies if I fucked that up, but he apparently was like this, maybe still is, this huge actor in the Bollywood scene who had starred in apparently tons and tons of movies and was named like Star of the Millennium or something like that. But he's apparently like a real like solid fixture in that market. So I can see why they would want him in here. This character doesn't really do much, at least as far as this synopsis is concerned. Maybe if they actually got to a script phase, maybe they would have actually been able to do something, but oh well. And a CIA operative informs the Rambos about Tomask's terrorist activities. He's been responsible for many deaths and recently fled to Malaysia, and he's under the employ of terrorist leader Kamal Rostam, who has fled to China, and there's this hilarious scene of him hanging out with hookers at this city in China, and Rostam is supposed to be Oded Fehr, who was in the Mummy movies at the time, and he's always been a really cool actor who played some really cool characters, so it'd be cool to see him play a bad guy here. And this isn't like the best example, but he did play a pretty good bad guy in Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, I will say that. The sleeper cell they're a part of is expected to make an attack on the U.S. sometime soon, and it's explained here that Michal, she is Lebanese Muslim by birth, but she's not really practicing it, and that Rambo has adopted Sufi Islam for his own spiritual beliefs. And they actually talk about this in the treatment, saying that this is drawn from David Morrell's novelizations of the Rambo sequels. And now, for those of you who don't know David Morrell, he wrote the original First Blood novel, which was adapted into the movie. And when they went and made the sequel movies 2 and 3, he got to write the novelizations. Now, I haven't read those. I hear they're actually pretty interesting and worth reading. And according to this, he gave Rambo this spiritual arc where in Rambo 2, he's kind of, getting interested in Zen Buddhism, and then in Rambo 3, he gets exposed to Sufi Islam, and he starts adopting that. So this seems like it's going from the David Morrell arc of things. I haven't read those books, so it'd be interesting to read those and see how much of that is actually there. A message is shown going out to the members of the sleeper cell, reaching Tomask in Malaysia, Rostam in China, where, like I mentioned, he's hanging out with prostitutes, and so many others all around the world. It then goes to the Rambo house in New Jersey, where Rambo is remembering helping out during 9/11, which would actually be a really cool scene, because if Rambo was there, I think he would have tried to help. And he's talking about he saw like a young man run in and he died trying to save people. Like, this would have been a pretty effective scene. He goes over his disillusionment with the U.S. and how it's handling things around the world. And it's revealed here that He never visited Tomask in Pakistan, as when he left, he saw his fire in his eyes and he realized what was really going on, which angers his wife, and they start fighting. And then Natalia, a UN translator and old friend of Tomask's, turns up at the house and pays them a visit. And she has been cast as an Italian actress named, let me find the page, Natalia Cigliuti, who had a bunch of roles I didn't recognize, and one was Sorority Girl in Joe Dirt, which I've seen Joe Dirt more times than I think most people have. And that movie, I don't remember her in that movie at all. She's either one of the people listening to the radio broadcast, or she's that woman walking down the street when he's in the hot air balloon and he goes, I can see down your shirt. I'm not sure what, it has to be one of those two, because otherwise I don't remember any sorority girls being in that movie. And since we did see him briefly in the present day, the adult Tomask would be played by Hrithik Roshan, who was one of the stars of that Mission Kashmir movie. And just reading a little bit about the synopsis of the movie, apparently that is a similar thing where you have an older military guy who raised this kid as his own, and Hrithik Roshan plays the adult version of him who goes off on his own and kind of turns against his father. So it seems like a similar role. Apparently he is viewed as his performance is like really well liked in that movie. So it does seem like he might have been a good fit for this. And that's pretty much the entire potential cast. Also, I should say about Natalia, in the character profile they rated for her, it puts in this piece of information that her and Tomask were good friends and that they were so close that she has trouble keeping up relationships ever since he left. And I'm like, that is the cheesiest fucking thing I have read. God damn. Okay, so the terrorists she basically turns up at the house and pays them a visit, but then the terrorists hold a board meeting in Dubai, and 2 days later they successfully infiltrate the UN during the Economic Forum and take the entire assembly hostage, including Mishal and Natalia. Rambo manages to slip away, and the building is surrounded by the US Army, while the country as a whole is locked down. Kamal then makes his big speech full of demands, wanting political prisoners released worldwide, but mainly he wants $86 billion transferred in pieces of $1 million to accounts worldwide. If the demands aren't met, then a series of bombs they planted in the building will be set off, killing the hostages. Rambo, not listening to the army or the terrorists, makes his way through the building and he starts picking off the terrorists. And as the treatment itself mentions, this is very similar to Die Hard. And they say, oh, but, it's automatically different because the way Rambo would handle this situation would be very different from John McClane. Only, at least as it's described in the synopsis, it's not that different at all, really, except he has shoes on. That's about it. I mean, even the terrorists are similar. They say they want all these political demands, but they're really more interested in money. A group of commandos are sent into the building, and Tomask comes across them while patrolling and kills them all, displaying near superhuman strength and speed, and that's a direct quote. Rambo finds him just after this, and they confront each other, with Rambo telling Tomask that he's in the wrong, that this isn't the true Muslim way, blah, 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 and informs him that Mishal and Natalia are among the hostages. Tomask walks away, saying he won't, tell anyone that he's seen Rambo. He returns to the assembly hall and speaks with Mishal and Natalia, and meanwhile, Kamal has become enraged and threatens worldwide biological and chemical attacks if the demands aren't met. And it's mentioned here that Kamal was too vicious even for the Taliban, who kicked him out. And I'm like, wow, you gotta be pretty bad in that case. And he gets further enraged at Rambo continuing to pick off so many of his men and gives orders for him to be killed. And there's a scene where, Talion stands up before him and gets smacked down. That's basically one of the only things he actually does in this. Tomask loses control and attacks Kamal, who beats him down until Mishal intervenes, which reveals how Tomask and Rambo are related. The money is then transferred, and as Kamal makes ready to leave with his men, Rambo notes that they're leaving one large bomb behind, which they intend to detonate regardless of demands being met. Kamal threatens to kill Tomask if Rambo doesn't turn himself over, which he does. Kamal then says that Rambo will be tortured in front of his family when they reach their destination. And so the terrorists are taken to Ellis Island via hovercraft, where the plane they'll escape on is waiting. Rambo breaks his hand to escape his bonds and fights Kamal, who wounds him badly. Tomask then enters the fight and beats Kamal nearly to death, but stops when his family intervenes. And the family is united later, and Rambo is awarded by the Secretary General for his actions while his family and Natalia watch, so he gets the Star Wars ending. And this huge Bollywood actor gets to be Princess Leia. Okay, this treatment, not bad as an action movie. I don't know if you could really make it as work as a Rambo movie. It's not the worst thing I've read, but it seems really interested in these different themes more so than it is in the themes of Rambo itself. Also, Tomask's arc is a bit fucked up because I was expecting there to be some twist that he had infiltrated the terrorist group and that he was really one of the good guys. No, he's just a terrorist who kills fucking American soldiers and then killed a shitload of them in Afghanistan, apparently. And then kills like this team of commandos in America, but then because he feels bad about it and doesn't want his family to die, he gets redeemed, which doesn't quite feel earned to me personally. I don't quite buy into it. So yeah, that just feels wrong. Maybe this is something that would get ironed out in the actual script that they made one, but I don't think that they did. Now, going by the document, they did. There's this list of latest developments. I'm going to try and find that. And yeah, they don't actually have that in this document, which is kind of annoying. Oh, here it is. And they mentioned here that Alpha One Media, they were in contact with David Morrell and that they wanted to bring him on as a consultant, so it seemed like they were talking to him. And it does say that they sent it does say here that they sent their updated film treatment into the actual, main players in the Rambo film project, so the studio and Stallone. So it sounds like they did seriously pitch this. Now, I'm guessing Stallone or whoever looked at this and said, we don't want to do this, who are these guys? Which, I mean, I will give them credit. They are very ambitious here, but I don't feel like this was the right way for Rambo 4. It's not bad. I will say that, if they took this in maybe a different direction, made an original Stallone movie. And I do think it is an interesting idea to bring his kid back and actually the kid from Rambo 3 back that he bonded with, bring him back and into that post 9/11 setting is potentially very interesting. I just don't think it quite works the way it's done here. So that was Rambo Holy War. And that brings us to the next stage of development for the Rambo 4 project, where in around 2005, Stallone wrote a few drafts of a new script, which is based on the novel Homefront by Chuck Logan. And I'm just going to give the synopsis of this now. Is that the story was about Rambo living with his daughter in a small town when he was forced to fight against vengeful drug dealers. And the script was later changed and made into the 2013 movie starring Jason Statham. So this eventually became a different movie. Now, the book it's based on was not a Rambo-related thing. It was about a guy called Phil Broker, and in fact, it was book number 6 in the series, which that seems to be kind of a popular thing to do with book series, where they'll just take a random one and base the movie on that. They won't start at the beginning for some reason. Jack Reacher did the same thing where they took book 7 or something like that for the basis for the first movie. And that seems like a really common thing to do. And so this draft it's a third draft, and it mentions that it's at Millennium Films on the title page. So the rights had shifted from Dimension to there by this point, and it's dated July 14th, 2005. And it's a Sylvester Stallone draft, and it's, like I said, it's adapting that novel about Rambo versus his daughter defending themselves against meth dealers. And to just go right into the script, it opens in 1997 on a clapboard house somewhere in the U.S., and based on dialogue later, it's in Minnesota, where a biker gang led by Danny T is meeting with meth cookers for a deal. Armed DEA agents move in on the shack, which is now surrounded by cops. The bikers try to flee, but are mostly caught by the armored agents. Danny T is tackled to the ground by one of his own men, revealed to be Rambo, now an undercover agent with the DEA. Jojo, Danny T's drug-crazed son, pulls a gun on Rambo, who leg shoots him and brings him down, but he still gets torn to shreds by the other agents, and they say, he was armed and hostile, that's our operating procedure, blah blah. And this leads to Rambo quitting the agency. Now, right off the bat, I have to ask, what fucking law enforcement agency would hire Rambo, especially after what he pulled in First Blood? I mean, I get that the idea that he's this kind of rugged-looking guy who could blend in with something like a biker gang, and that he could actually pull that off, but still, this guy does not have the best history of law enforcement, and somehow he got hired into the DEA. It just feels like a bit of a stretch, and it really does feel like they just kind of subbed out the name of the original character for Rambo here in a lot of ways. And there's no explanation for how he came to be with the DEA. It just starts with him there. So it's you really should, it really does feel like he just kind of swapped the character names in and out. And then cuts to the then present day, which will be 2005 in Stillwater, Minnesota at the Glacier Falls Elementary School. Bully Teddy Klum steals a jacket of a girl named Kit, who punches him in the nose over it. And the woman who's watching the recess, she doesn't see this happen. All she sees is the punch. She doesn't see the lead up to it. And we then go to a lakeside house where Rambo is chopping wood when he gets a call. So he is going full commando here. Turns out it's from the school and that Kit is his daughter. He arrives to find that Sheriff Nygaard is there trying to pacify Teddy's parents, Jimmy and Cassie, but mainly Cassie, who is screaming and making threats. Rambo is taken to see Kit and the school principal by Susan Hatch, the school psychologist. He's told that the recess monitor only saw Kit's attack and that she'll need to be readmitted. We learn here that they've been traveling around to different places and that Kit's mother died over a year ago from cancer. Rambo also apologizes, saying he was the one who taught her self-defense, and the principal gets really snooty with him about that. And this is one thing I have to bring up, because I've not read the book, but I did check some reviews on its Goodreads page in preparation for this, and there was a bunch of people who said they came to the book from the movie, and they mentioned that the movie made a few major changes. The most notable one was the fact that in the book, Phil Broker's wife is alive and well and plays a major part in the story, and for this version, Stallone wrote her out, and they kept that for the Statham version, apparently. So that's an interesting little difference here. Also, the whole thing about how dare you teach her to fight, blah, 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 that is so true to schools. Even if the recess monitor had seen the lead up to the punch, they wouldn't give a shit. I know this from experience that schools do not believe in the concept of self-defense, which is just stupid to me, really. But, it is what it is. Outside the school, Rambo and Kit are about to leave as Jimmy comes up to Rambo, angrily demanding an apology. Sheriff Nygaard, who is watching from his car, tells Jimmy to back off, but he still attacks Rambo, punches him, and puts him in a chokehold until the sheriff intervenes. The sheriff talks to Rambo. It's mentioned that he's renting the lake house, and both parties then drive away. Cassie, even angrier than before, has Jimmy drive her to her brother Gator Bodine's ranch, not seeing the sheriff following them. Cassie talks to Gator, telling him she overheard where Rambo is living, and she goes, hey, this guy's a part-time stonecutter. How is he affording this truck he's driving around in? And how is he affording to rent this lake house? Something's up. And she asks him to go put a scare in him and try to force him to leave, and then begs him for a hit of meth because she's a meth head. And Gator says he'll send some of his men after Rambo for a beating, and tells Cassie to lay off the drugs, but gives her some anyways. So yeah, he's the local meth cooker, who in the movie I believe was played by James Franco. And later, Rambo is leaving the school after the readmission conference, and Susan tells him that feuds can get pretty nasty around there, and that it would be best for him to make peace. And I thought this character of the school psychologist was actually going to be important. I swear she all but disappears after this. So that's, a bit of a flub there. So he takes her advice, he drives over to Jimmy's sanitation business to settle things, and even swallows his pride and apologizes. Jimmy says that that's settled things, and Rambo leaves without issue. He then stops to get gas at a filling station where he gets accosted by two rednecks who were sent by Gator. And they try to beat him down, but he simply fights back and destroys them. It reads like it would have been a pretty cool little fist fight scene. Rambo then stops by a sanitation building again, tempted to go in and start something, but he just drives away. And we go to Gator, who is cooking meth in his barn. And we never do get his real name, by the way. He's just called Gator. He gets a call about what happened and leaves, leaving his addict assistant Terry in charge of the equipment. Rambo picks up Kit from school, and they have a nice little conversation in the car. That's one thing the script does really well is the relationship between Rambo and the kid. You really do get a sense of, it is really sweet and charming. I will say that. There's a good little, rapport between them. They get stopped by Sheriff Nygaard, who says that Jimmy told him that he tried to start something at the sanitation building, but that Jimmy got him to cool down. He also brings up the gas station fight, but since no charges were pressed, Rambo tells him to let it go. And Nygaard then brings up that he looked into Rambo and found only his military record, but no civilian employment. Rambo advises him to let it be, but he says he'll be around if Rambo needs him. And so we go to Rambo and Kit. They go out horseback riding at their house. And Gator sneaks into their house while they're doing that and looks around, finding a drug enforcement t-shirt. He then steals some files from a box, as well as Kit's stuffed rabbit, before flattening Rambo's tire with a screwdriver and taking their kitten, Luther. And yes, as you can guess, that file is about his undercover work. So yeah, good work, undercover agent here, leaving your shit just sitting out for anybody to find. Stunning work. Yeah, I can see why the DEA hired you. You are just so competent. That night after Rambo and Kit have dinner and Kit notices that Luther and the rabbit are missing, Gator looks through the file he stole, finding out that Rambo was the undercover agent who was present when JoJo was shot dead. Now, I should mention this, that apparently in the book, the book doesn't mention why they moved into this. I guess that was the subject of the previous book, and that the book Homefront just doesn't mention why they moved into this town and what happened in the past. So I'm guessing they're kind of Stallone is kind of piecing stuff together himself here. I don't really know. He then calls up his business partner, Cheryl Mott, and tells her that he's found something big and wants to meet with her tomorrow. And so back at the lake house, Rambo puts Kit to bed, who is still worried about Luther, afraid that he got outside and might get eaten. Rambo promises that he'll find the kitten, trying to put her at ease. And Gator then goes to visit Jimmy and Cassie, the latter of whom is in the middle of a huge meth binge. Gator talks to Jimmy, withholding the full truth from him. He says that he merely suspects that Rambo is a cop, and tells Jimmy to keep messing with him, but nothing too big. He then leaves and runs across Terry and a few other meth heads cooking in an abandoned house, beating them senseless and telling them to leave and that he'll kill them all if he catches them cooking in his territory again. And back with Rambo, he exits the house and follows Gator's tracks, which he wore felt over his shoes to obscure. He then comes across a branch planted in the ground with the stuffed rabbit's head piked on the top and the cat's collar wrapped around it. And that's supposed to be intimidating, but A, it's a stuffed rabbit, and B, all I can think of is that ending to the original Doom with the bunny's head on the spike. That's all I can think of. And I should mention, isn't that a little bit silly that the events of this script only seem to happen because of a fight in the schoolyard that someone took way too seriously? Like, goddamn. The next morning, Jimmy is driving the garbage truck when it stops by Rambo's house to pick up the garbage. He deliberately lets Rambo's dumpster spill out on the ground. Rambo takes the high road and reports the incident to the sheriff, who later visits Jimmy at his place of business. Jimmy plays dumb about what happened, but Sheriff Nygaard warns him that Rambo is someone you might not want to mess with. And so, this is basically just the whole thing that Gator has going on with Jimmy is basically just meant to be a distraction while he, goes ahead with his own plan. So meanwhile, Cheryl, who is described as being a former biker girl, and she has this whole history we get into later, comes to visit Gator, who tells her all about Rambo and shows her the file. Danny T still has a bounty out on the snitch who got JoJo killed, and he wants Cheryl to negotiate the terms with the still imprisoned biker boss. And it's mentioned that, he was never found, and Gator's like, oh, the reason he was never found is because he was an undercover cop, and that Rambo never had to testify in court. And he's like, oh, so this is why he didn't testify. So he's kind of piecing together what happened. Cheryl seems reluctant, which then Gator gets violent towards, thrashing her around. And he says that he wants to use this to get leverage with Danny T and buy his way into the meth empire. Cheryl finally backs down, and the plan is for her to bring the info directly to Danny's lawyer. Cheryl hands the file over to the lawyer, works, and she visits him in a parking garage. He takes it to Danny T in prison. And I actually really like the scene where Danny T finds out, because it's done without dialogue. It's shown entirely from the window of the room, I think, from outside, and you're just watching his reaction as he looks into the file. I thought that was actually a really cool visual, the way it was written. Meanwhile, it's Kit's birthday, and Rambo has her invite all of her classmates to her party after school, including Teddy. And Cassie tries to start trouble, but Rambo apologizes and offers to place Rambo's apologies and offered to replace Teddy's bloody SpongeBob shirt seems to pacify her. And so that was a random reference to SpongeBob. But that seems to pacify her. Rambo then meets with a local worker and friend, a black man named Tito, and they get to work. Here, I'm Michael Jackson, you Tito. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. And they get to work on laying flagstones down for Rambo's patio. Tito talks about how he knows what went down at the school, and Rambo mentions the break-in. And so Tito tells him about Gator, and he snitches on small-time meth dealers to Sheriff Nygaard, and he gets left alone in return, because the two have been friends for years and everybody knows it. He also mentions the location of Gator's shop, as well as the fact that he eats breakfast at the same diner every day. Cheryl meets with Danny's biker gang, led by Simon Hanks, who remembers Cheryl from when she was with the gang. They negotiate over the information, with Cheryl wanting better shipping for the chemicals used to make meth, before Hanks agrees to the terms and she tells him where Rambo is located. And we also learned here that she was caught selling to Mexicans, which I guess is, a no-go thing to do, and was forced onto the streets to hook because of that. So, damn, this gang is fucking bad. This is intercut with Kit's birthday party in the school gym, where she seems to have mended fences with Teddy. Which, he's an asshole bully. I don't really see this working, but okay. So Rambo has trouble sleeping that night, and the next day he goes to meet Gator at that restaurant that was mentioned. Gator is meeting with Cheryl, who confirms that the deal is on just as Rambo walks in. Rambo tries to talk to Gator rationally, but he just mocks him. And he keeps talking after Rambo is already turned to go, and Rambo turns back, slamming him into the floor and telling him to let it go. And Rambo leaves, noting Cheryl's license plate as he goes, and Gator, now pissed off over this incident, considers taking down Rambo to be a personal score to settle. He heads over to a local bar and angrily beats the paper towel dispenser before collecting himself and playing some pool. So okay, wannabe meth kingpin beating up a paper towel dispenser. Did Vince Gilligan read this script? Come on, tell me the truth now. That totally is that scene from, I think it's season 2. I think it's season 2 of Breaking Bad where he finds out his cancer's in remission. He gets pissed off about it and he beats up the paper towel dispenser. I'm pretty sure that was in season 2 of Breaking Bad. That being said, I would totally sit down and watch Rambo versus Walter White. That would actually be pretty cool. Cooler than this script is anyways. So while Gator is hanging out in the bar, Rambo heads over to Gator's place and checks out the barn. And he discovers the meth equipment, which is stashed in a hidden compartment. And he then booby traps the light bulbs in the room with gasoline injected into them and leaves just in time before Gator gets back. So back at the lake house, Rambo looks up Cheryl's license plate, getting her entire history. And it's mentioned he has this special computer program that only goes out to law enforcement. And I'm like, but he's not with law enforcement anymore. Why does he still have this shit? Why does he still have the files even? I don't really know. He gets her entire history and he tells Kit that it's time to move, which she reacts badly to. She's saying, we always move. I finally have some friends in the place and now you want to leave. And of course he doesn't explain anything to her, which granted, she is in like the 5th grade. So I guess it's understandable, but still. The biker assassins arrive at Gator's place and they butt heads almost instantly, with Hanks not showing Gator any respect. He even expects Gator to come along for the kill, but he refuses, saying he's going to be seen in the public place while it goes down. And this whole scene of Hanks and Gator posturing at each other and like swapping insults is really cringy to read. Like, oh my God, these come off like wannabe tough guys, not actual tough guys. But then again, I mean, Gator is the guy who just because he got confronted in a restaurant, he decided to go beat up a paper towel dispenser like a little bitch. So, whatever. As the bikers and Cheryl set out for the lake house, Gator drives into town to tell Sheriff Nygaard about the meth cooking he busted up in the abandoned house, and Nygaard comments that he didn't need to drive all the way here for it, but Gator says he felt like visiting before heading home. And meanwhile, Rambo is busy getting everything packed, handing the horses off to Tito, who struggles with getting them into the trailer on his truck while Rambo starts packing his guns. The 9 bikers then begin to approach the house on foot, surrounding it, and Cheryl, by the way, is off sitting by her car. Tito spots one of the men approaching, who shoots him when he tries to confront him. This alerts Rambo, who hands Kid a cell phone and tells her to climb out through the basement window, run for the woods, and call 911. He then arms up and is about to fight the bikers when he looks out the window and sees one of them has spotted Kit and is following her into the woods. And so Rambo fights his way out of the house, and a forest chase ensues with Rambo taking out all of the assassins. And this whole scene is awesome. Like, this is where the script actually gets really good and very, very Rambo for a bit. Like, this is totally, it's like that scene in First Blood where he's taking down the cops in the woods, only here he is not holding back. He is just slaughtering these fucking bikers. Like, Jesus. Like, this is where it's like, oh, okay, this finally became Rambo. And one is just wounded, but Tito, who is wounded but alive, runs him over with his truck, so Tito gets in a kill. And Kit manages to make the 911 call, but runs into Cheryl where she's waiting at her car. And Cheryl, because she's stupid, just hits her and stuffs her into the trunk, driving off. The cops arrive on the scene and Tito gets taken away in an ambulance. And Kit, who still has the cell phone, which you think Cheryl would have noticed, especially since this is 2005 and they would still be using flip phones, but whatever, I guess. She calls Rambo from the trunk, describing Cheryl to him. I think she calls into him through the 911 dispatcher, so they get patched through. And he tells her to hide the phone and call him later if she can. Rambo then tells Sheriff Nygaard that they can trace a cell call if need be, and gives a description of Cheryl's car, having deduced it was her who snatched Kit. I'm not sure, because Kit described the woman and described the car, so Rambo deduces that. Kit keeps the call on as Cheryl drives. When they arrive at Gator's, she stabs Cheryl with a screwdriver that was in the trunk, getting her to slam the trunk closed again, but she did get a good look at the red tractor sign outside, and the dispatcher manages to get that info to Rambo and Nygaard. And the former speeds off in a cop car to go to Gator's place, so he's just straight up stealing cars. Gator arrives back at his place, pissed at what Cheryl has done. Jimmy and Cassie arrive soon after, angered at the shooting that Gator set up. Cassie spots Kit and Cheryl in the darkened barn, flipping the switch and setting off the light bulbs, making the barn explode. So oops. Yeah, it took quite a while for that to pay off. And she tries to help Kit get out of there, but Gator just shoots her and Jimmy, forcing Kit into his truck. Now this is a third draft too, so I think this is kind of a problem that I still don't buy into Cassie's redemption arc here. It's like she's a total psycho, and then Rambo offers to pay for the fucking stupid SpongeBob shirt that got bloody, and then she warms up and suddenly she's like semi-heroic. I don't really buy into that really at all the way this draft does it. And another problem is that Tito, he's literally in like one scene or two, and then he gets shot and taken off in an ambulance. Like, he's barely even a presence in this script, so why do we care? That's another problem. Rambo comes speeding up the road, and Cheryl tries to get Gator to back down, only for him to pistol whip her unconscious, and gets in his truck and speeds off. An off-road chase ensues with the police not far behind. Eventually, a police helicopter gets a spotlight on Gator's truck, but Rambo keeps the chase up despite orders from Sheriff Nygaard to back down. He follows Gator into a thickly wooded area and hooks the bumpers together, causing the truck to spin out. And Gator, holding Kit hostage, backs up against a tree. Now, that is actually a legitimately decent little car chase there. Rambo bursts from hiding and knocks Kit away from Gator before throwing down a knife for Gator to fight with. It doesn't help much, though, as Rambo savagely beats Gator, breaking one arm and both of his legs. Now, this is another problem with the script, is that Gator Bodine isn't a very intimidating villain. Like, they do describe him as being on the big side, but the character just, like, you never believe that this guy's going to have any chance at all against Rambo. So for him to be, like, the final villain of the piece, I don't think that quite works out. He very nearly kills Gator, but backs down because Kid is present. They embrace, and it cuts to Danny T in prison, where he's visited by Rambo. He tells the gang leader that he'll be the first and last thing he sees when he gets out. And so Rambo takes off in his truck with Kit, with a U-Haul attached to the back in search of a new life, and it ends. So this script, not the worst thing ever. The storyline is okay enough. I mean, like I said, the setup is ridiculous that this whole thing is kicked off by a schoolyard fight. Like, that's just really stupid. And I know these, like, backwoods meth smokers probably would take something like that seriously, but I don't think it really plays as drama. And overall, it just doesn't really feel particularly Rambo to me. And that's even more of a problem here than it was in the eventual Last Blood, because that is noticeable there, but there's some kind of But I mean, this just feels like a completely different story that had Rambo just name swapped into it. And that's essentially what happened. Stallone adapted the novel and just did it with Rambo. Now, this wasn't the end of this particular version of Rambo, because there was something where, like, he discarded it for a different version, and he eventually brought it back after he had done Rambo 4 and kind of worked with this as a Rambo 5, and he brought in screenwriter Sean Hood to, like, really heavily rewrite it, and he did an outline of it, which he put on his blog, but the full script has never been released. And it was basically this, but it was very heavily revised to make it fit more as a Rambo movie. And I won't go into too much detail here, because what I'm planning on doing eventually in the future is do a Rambo 5 episode, which would be that treatment and the early draft of Last Blood, because that has enough differences in it to be worth talking about. So that will be a future episode down the line. Maybe more stuff in it if I can find any more of the Rambo 5 scripts, like the Savage Hunt version would be interesting to read. But yeah, so that's going to be a down the line thing to talk about. But eventually, Stallone just kind of gave up on it, and he handed the Homefront project over to Statham, who did it as a standalone thing based on the book. They changed the character back to Phil Broker, and that was probably for the best ultimately, because I don't think this really works as a Rambo movie, at least in its current form. So Stallone moved on from the Homefront idea, and that brings us to this next script that we're going to be talking about. And this would have been around 2004, and this is where the idea of what eventually became Last Blood kind of gets seeded. The idea of Rambo going south of the border to rescue a girl from human traffickers. It pretty much starts here, and this was it ends up with a script called Rambo for Borderline by Dan Gordon, who's best known for working on Passenger 57, and he also wrote 2 episodes early on in the Highlander TV show, which weren't amazing, but it was season 1, so they weren't quite there yet, and he didn't stick around, unfortunately. It would have been kind of cool if he did. But I have seen those, and the storyline of this one is that it's Rambo who has returned home to America. He's living in Arizona again, but he's found himself kind of unable to live among people, and he's sort of like withdrawn from society. He lives in this shack up in the middle of nowhere, and his only connection really is with this old Mexican woman named Rosario, whose daughter was supposed to come across the border with the illegal immigrants, but she disappeared. And, she's been kidnapped and sold into slavery by some bad people connected with the cartel. And so Rambo has to go south of the border to try and find her and figure out what happened. So that's essentially what the story is here. Now, to go into the actual events of the script, it opens with 2 voices, an old woman with a Mexican accent and a younger woman who speaks unaccented English, as the old woman tells the younger one a legend about a man. And we then see an old Indian fishing for trout in an Arizona stream, and when we see his face, he is revealed to be Rambo. So yeah, this script really leans on the idea of Rambo's Native American heritage, which is something which is brought up in, like, I think one line in Rambo 2, where where Murdoch is looking at his file and he goes, German Indian, hell of a combination, which that line is used in this almost verbatim for a different character. And it's really interesting. This script really tapped into a side of Rambo that had never really been explored before. So that's already starting off pretty good. And this whole idea of Rambo being like this legendary character is pretty cool. He now lives in a shack away from people where he meets Rosario, an older Mexican woman who visits once a week to do his laundry. She also takes his fish and pelts to trade for supplies, namely coffee, sugar, and soda, specifically Diet Coke, and keeps whatever is left over as her pay. That night, Rambo goes to sleep and cries out from his PTSD-induced nightmares. The cries carry down the canyon where they're heard by a ranching family, the father using them to scare his young children into eating their vegetables. The narration emphasizes this, saying that Rambo has become a legend used to frighten children. This whole idea of Rambo being this figure who has sort of entered modern folklore is really neat. I don't know, I just think it's really cool. Like this idea that a larger-than-life character like Rambo, even if people don't know exactly who he is and what he's done, he's left this real impression on the locals like this. It's a really intriguing idea that they're dealing with here. And we then go to a family of campers that get caught in a flash flood in the canyon. The father is swept away and killed, and the mother tries to get her two young children out of there. Rambo appears on the scene, looking frightening in appearance. He climbs out of the canyon with the youngest child, but the mother and the older boy get swept downstream. Rambo follows, finding them clinging to a tree. He saves the kid, but the mother is swept away again and killed. And Rambo drops the children off at a ranger station before disappearing into the night. Now, that's a very intense, very interesting sequence. It's exciting, but it's also sad the way it plays out. And this is a scene which more or less ended up in Rambo Last Blood, depending on where you are. It's in the extended cut. That should have just been the theatrical version, frankly. And it's in somewhat altered form, and that's one of the reasons why Dan Gordon gets a story credit on that movie, because the basic premise initially came from this script. The idea of Rambo, dealing with, Mexico and the cartels and the kidnapped girl and, the kidnapped girl's grandmother, that it being someone that he knows. Like, it's all these ideas that ended up in that movie, but they didn't do it in the same way. From there, we go to the U.S. southern border, where two Border Patrol agents are watching from a car. The older one, Aaron, explains to his younger partner, Beth, about how the border really isn't supposed to stop anyone, and that the influx of cheap labor is good for the powers that be. And he talks about how like, no offense, they talked about how, like, if they really wanted to stop it, like, they would lock it down tight. He says, like, one side, wants these people to come in because they want to make them Americans so they can vote for them, and the other side just wants the cheap labor. And the price of lettuce going down is good for everyone. So it's a really food for thought little speech he has here. It makes you really think about the situation, which Stallone at this point in his career was all about that, because he really wanted to put thoughtful stuff into the movies. Like Rambo 4 we eventually made had a lot of thoughtful, it was basically educating you on the atrocities that are being committed in Burma. And then the first Expendables, like if you watch that movie with the commentary on, like Stallone is like really intense about the details on that, about stuff like the way the CIA is used and the torture scenes. Like he was talking about like torture and waterboarding. It's in the news. I'm going to show you what it's actually like. So he's definitely a guy who thinks about these kind of things and would want them to be in the movie in some way. And they watch as a line of vehicles approaches the border to smuggle over illegal immigrants. And we then go to the migrants as they cross the border, led by men who are called coyotes, and that's an actual real term for the guys who lead these groups. And one of them takes note of an attractive teenage girl named Catalina. She's smuggling over that sweet receipt paper, coupon paper, I should say. If you don't work retail, you have no idea what I'm talking about. As the rest of the migrants are packed into hidden spaces inside a truck, the coyote points out Catalina to the driver, saying they could sell her to a man called Dupree for money. He then lures Catalina, saying he'll get her some food and that she can ride in one of the cars instead. We then go to Rambo, who is out hunting deer and is about to shoot a doe, but changes his mind at the last minute and screams at it to go. So we're getting some nuance from Rambo here. He returns to his shack where Rosario is doing the laundry and notices that she hasn't brought the supplies. And when he asks her about this, she tells him that her granddaughter was supposed to cross the border to be with her, and that the coyotes had been paid $3,000 to do so, but that she hasn't shown up. Rosario wants Rambo to cross the border to Agua Clara and ask the man they paid, Ramon Fuentes, about her, but Rambo says no, to which she storms out and refuses to come back. And after, he's sitting there drinking his coffee without the sugar, and he's thinking it over, and is eating at him, he goes, He goes and visits Rosario at her apartment where she has been praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe. All he can promise is that he'll ask, but she's confident that he'll find her, saying she prayed to the lady and that she said that Rambo will find the girl. All he can promise is that he'll ask, but she's confident that he'll find her, and she gives him her picture, revealing the granddaughter to be Catalina. Rambo heads to the border, crossing at Clearwater, which is the American border town across from Agua Clara, but can't cross into Mexico officially as he has no passport or even a birth certificate with him. And Rambo then finds a hole in the border fence and crosses that way, heading to a staging area for migrants in Agua Clara, asking about Fuentes and Catalina. He eventually meets a young woman named Graciela, who says she can point him to people who know Fuentes if he'll pay her, and balks at the $5 he has on him, but relents when he says he's doing it for her grandmother. She takes Rambo to a bar and points him to a man named Bayo, who just stonewalls Rambo's questions until two of his men sneak up on him and beat him with pool cues. And Bayo takes Rambo's Bowie knife and threatens to gut him, but Rambo breaks loose from the two men holding him, and he just lets loose on these bad guys in the bar. Like, one of the guys who was holding him, it says he kicks his knee, and he breaks the kneecap off, and it slides down his leg, and he's like, he grabs up, it's like, this is so brutal, this sequence. Like, he grabs up the pool cues, using them as fighting sticks, which is a nice callback to the beginning of Rambo 3, where you see him stick fighting. And he brutally beats down 5 of the men, one of whom he like smashes over the head with one, and the other one he like stabs him in the eye with the pool cue, like Jesus. And it ends with Bayo, who tries to stab Rambo with his own knife, but just gets his arm broken so that the bone is sticking out. It's like, ugh! Like, the violence of this is just, ugh, like, it's really brutal, like, Jesus. Rambo threatens to break his other arm if he doesn't tell him where Fuentes is, and he relents, giving him the location. Graciela says she knows the address, saying it's the headquarters of a gang called the Mayomberos, who practice a brutal religion that's likened to voodoo, and they boil human heads in a cauldron. And Rambo tells Graciela to dump Bayo and meet him at the border in an hour. She agrees to help him, saying that she's looking for her kidnapped sister as well. And this is something that is sort of makes its way into Last Blood, this character, because there's the character who's played by Paz Vega, who helps Rambo, and in the early draft, she had a sister who was kidnapped as well, but that didn't make it into the movie for whatever reason. With some differences with this character as we go along. He then approaches the gang compound, stealthily taking down one of the guards with bolos, and getting him to point out Fuentes. And yeah, those are things you like whip them over your head and make. The way this scene is described is really cool because they hear the whistling sound of the bolos and it wraps around them and clanks them on the head. Really cool the way it's described, and would be really cool to see in the movie. And he gets him to point out Fuentes, and so Rambo climbs onto the roof of the house and on top of the covered porch, where Fuentes and multiple gang members, including the coyote who kidnapped Catalina, are waiting. Rambo crashes down onto the porch, taking Fuentes hostage at knife point. Fuentes eventually relents, saying that they sold her to Dupree, who runs a brothel out of an old motel in Lesterville called the El Moro, if I'm going to be pronouncing that in proper Spanish way, and that Dupree works for someone called the Judge, but Fuentes doesn't know anything about him, so that's, a thing they build over the course of the strip. Rambo then orders one of the gang members to start his motorcycle so that Rambo can make a getaway, but the coyote steps up, threatening Rambo and gutting Fuentes because he's making a power play for control of the gang. And the coyote saying he was the first to rape Catalina once she was sold. I'm like, dude, you just signed your death warrant right there. Orders the gang to kill Rambo, but he just takes them down with a combination of bolos and his knife. So yeah, it's getting even crazier with the action here. Rambo jumps on the motorcycle and makes a quick getaway with the coyote and the rest of the gang chasing after him, and he takes down a couple of them, gets them to crash, and a chase ensues with the coyote calling in more gang members to join in, and Rambo eventually takes them all down in various ways. There's a truck that's crossing the highway, and they can't get around it because of the guardrails. So he slides the motorcycle under the truck, and a bunch of them just smash into the side of it, and they get knocked out of the chase. And a few different things happen. He goes off the road and he stops after a rise, and as they're the motorcycles are going over the rise, leaping through the air, he's knocking them off the motorcycle with a machete and killing them. Really cool stuff here. And eventually it's just two guys, and it's just one guy and the coyote is left, and the guy's like, I ain't fucking with this guy, fuck it, and he just leaves. And so the coyote is there, is the only one left, and then they essentially joust with their motorcycles. They ride at each other, and as he rides, Rambo chops off the coyote's head with a machete. Holy shit, up until that bar scene, this script is pretty light on the action. You have the flood scene, but that's not a traditional kind of Rambo or even an action movie action scene as more of a disaster movie thing. And then that bar scene happens, and then this happens almost immediately after it, and it's like, holy shit, this script is awesome. Like, wow. Like, that's where it kicks off. It's like, I knew this was going to be just a great read. Like, I knew it was going to be good from early on because of some of the character stuff they were doing, but the action kicks in. It's just like, holy shit, this is Rambo as he should be. And Rambo then heads off to meet up with Graciela, scaring some spring break partiers that they're heading to cross back over the border because they're waiting at they're waiting for a train to cross the road, and they pull up next to him and they see he's covered in blood, and they just immediately turn around and leave. Rambo, after washing the blood off, meets back up with Graciela at the staging area, and she's made a deal with a coyote to take them over. And after bluffing that Rambo is mentally challenged, give him the motorcycle as payment. They then talk with Rambo telling her that he's learned about the El Moro, finally telling her that Catalina isn't related to him. And she doesn't understand why Rambo would fight and kill for a complete stranger, but he just deflects her questions and goes to sleep, saying, "Lady, you give me headaches." And then the group of illegals, they get together later on and cross the border under the cover of night. And once they've crossed over into Arizona, the coyote in charge runs into some drug smugglers who are forced to stash a large number of packs filled with marijuana in a cave, and the migrants get pressed into service as pack mules, including Rambo. And they say these are 80-pound packs, so they're pretty heavy. And they continue on their way, hiding from a border patrol helicopter before running into a car driven by Aaron. And things escalate into a hostage situation with the lead coyote threatening to kill the entire group, starting with women and children. He shoots one of them to make good on his claim, and Rambo jumps into action, taking them all down, once again in brutal fashion. And then one of them gets Graciela into a neck hold, but she just bites his arm, giving Rambo an opening to shoot him, because he's aiming the gun, and he actually lowers it because of the threat, and then she gets out of the hold, he just fires from the hip and blows his head off. Like, awesome stuff. After the conflict has wrapped up and the border patrol has arrived in force, Rambo is interviewed by Aaron while Graciela speaks to another agent. Aaron recognizes Rambo's shared Indian heritage, something they share in common, and it's through this sort of bonding that Rambo gets Aaron to let him walk, telling him about Catalina and letting him think she's his granddaughter. So Rambo isn't afraid to bullshit to get to his goal, which is pretty cool, interesting idea for a character. And Rambo and Graciela go on their way, hitching a ride into Lesterville from a Native American driver, who once again Rambo is using his heritage in an interesting way. And they spot the El Moro as they head into town. And Rambo has them stop at a currently vacant storefront church, saying they should be able to get some help there. While they wait outside for people to arrive, Rambo and Graciela drink water from a wall faucet. She asks him about himself again, and he asks about the war. He talks about the war and how he got in trouble afterwards. He's referring back to the events of First Blood. And he wonders why God made a man like him, and Graciela compares him to a wildfire that burns out all of the dead wood, saying that he exists to take out the people who are making the world a bad place, it's interesting that a Rambo movie is bringing such a philosophy to it. I really like how this is written. Later on, the congregation arrives, and Rambo talks to one of their leaders, who is Brother Irby, who agrees to help them get some clean clothes, food, and a shower, because they need to be cleaned up, essentially, in order to get into the El Moro, because they don't want to look like poor people who just walked in off the street. During the worship service that night, it turns out that the church practices snake handling, and they all reach into the snake's cage and let it bite them. And Rambo, who's looking for a sign for some kind of purpose, he takes part as well. He sticks his hand in, and he lets the snake bite him longer than anyone else does. And not only is he unharmed, but the snake curls up and dies. And not only is this just a really cool way to sort of underline the legendary, larger-than-life nature of the Rambo character in a different way than the other movies do, this is also the same friggin' thing. Like, in Expendables 2, this turns up as the Chuck Norris joke that Stallone tells the Chuck Norris. So, did Stallone remember this script and go, hey, a snake bit you on the arm and it died? Like, did he remember that? Did he remember this script and then put that into Expendables 2? I really do wonder, but he makes it. I mean, that's how badass Rambo is. Even a rattlesnake can't kill him. Damn right. So after eating with the congregation, Rambo and Graciela get a ride over to the El Moro with a plan in place in case they spot her sister as well as Catalina. And they go in with Rambo saying that he's come from Fuentes on business. And he meets with Dupree in the bar, and he's described as being a Mickey Rourke type. So this is before whatever happened after Expendables 1 where they didn't get along anymore, and so he left the sequel. So he could probably still get Mickey Rourke. And he says he's coming to sell him Graciela, and there's this whole thing where he's looking her over, and then so Rambo bargains hard, eventually coming down to $1,250 and an hour with a girl of his choosing. And Dupree shows Rambo a board with pictures of the girls on it, and he picks out Catalina, and it's mentioned that Graciela doesn't spot her sister on there. Rambo then insists on taking them both back to the room with him, to which Dupree acquiesces, but gives him less time, going like, you only get 30 minutes, Tonto. And that's a thing in this script. Everybody recognizes Rambo as being Native American in this, which, once again, is something which they're taking what was essentially a throwaway reference in Rambo 2 and really building something cool out of it. I really do like it. And so they get back to the room, and Rambo reveals that he's there to rescue her, but Catalina insists that wouldn't work, as the judge, who is partnered with the cartels, knows where her family lives and would kill them if she escaped. She says that the judge breaks in the new girls himself, taking them to parties with his corrupt friends at his place on the border in Santa Rosa, which he rules absolutely. She says she saw him with the cartel leader Ramon Esperanza and saw him kill a girl who didn't cooperate. And Graciela she hones in on this, is very interested, asking her if she's sure she saw Judge Teasel do these things. And this catches Rambo's attention, asks about his physical description, and realizing this is the same sheriff he fought with in Washington all those years ago. He tells Catalina that he'll hide her and her grandmother, and that he'll go after Teasel's people and kill them all. So that's an interesting twist. I do have my questions about it. Like, I do think you could have done a little bit more with Teasel than this script ends up doing. Like, it would have been interesting to see him maybe once a little bit earlier, see a little bit more of him. And it also would have been nice to get a little bit more development of him, because he's like pure evil in this script. And I'm not really sure how he got there, because in First Blood, he's not a very nice guy. He's pretty much an asshole. But I don't see him being like this pure evil that he is in this script. I don't quite see the jump that he made, how he came to that jump. A little bit more development of the character and how he is the way he is now would be appreciated. Like, for example, say maybe his experience with Rambo kind of broke him in some way, and that he sort of, that triggered some sort of downward spiral that brought him to the place that he is now. But, it doesn't need to be a lot. It just needs to be a little bit, sort of, to bridge that gap between the Teasel that we know from First Blood and the Teasel here. And Rambo wants to duck out the back door, but Catalina tells him that it's been welded shut. They then cut through the bar. That's a fire hazard. They then cut through the bar, and Rambo talks with Dupree, who notices that the girls are heading for the front door, and calls in some bouncers to stop it. And Rambo jumps into action, viciously beating and killing the bouncer, and twisting Dupree's arm until it's broken backwards, and he takes the bouncer's baseball bat and smashes his other hand with it. And Dupree pushes a button, alerting a number of bouncers to Rambo's presence, who just orders the patrons in the bar to get out of the building before the fight begins. And so he knocks down 2 with a baseball bat, and flees to the kitchen, where he almost gets his face burned on the stove by a bouncer before he throws hot soup in his face. And then Rambo lets the gas stoves run, one with the flame still on, and goes back to the bar to fight more of the bouncers, and it's mentioned that he smacks one in the groin with the baseball bat, ooh. Once again, very brutal action in this script, before going upstairs and kicking down doors, telling the girls and the patrons to leave. And as Dupree and his men watch from the parking lot, Rambo appears on the roof, telling them to tell Teasel that hellfire is coming for him. And he runs off into the night because the motel backs up onto some hills, and he leaps off the roof and onto the hills and runs down as the motel explodes. Oh, this is awesome. It is definitely over the top and definitely an action movie, but this balances that tone really well. It balances the big action and the more serious tone and story so goddamn well. And just that image of Rambo wreathed in flames and giving that threat towards Teasel from the roof of the building it would be so awesome to see. It would be incredible. So Rambo, Graciela, and Catalina, they meet up and they manage to get away, calling Rosario from a payphone. Rambo then spots a kid driving a beat-up old car and buys it from him with the money he got from Dupree. And so Rambo drives Graciela and Catalina up to a shack, and he notes there's a D9 tractor parked at a construction site along the way. Remember that. And they meet up with Rosario at the shack, and he says he's going to take them up to his winter cabin, which is even more isolated. He goes inside, takes note of the supplies Rosario has brought him, and he has a bit of a smile to himself. And he opens a compartment in the floor, removing a case that contains his bow and explosive arrows, and suits up ready for combat. Yes, the C4 arrows are back. I miss them so much in 4 and 5. Like 4 I don't mind too much because you get some badass shit like the 50 cal scene, him ripping the guy's throat out with his bare hands, and some things. But I mean, I do miss them, and the fact that they were in this script and they're in that early draft of Last Blood and they didn't make it into that movie either. Like, I want to see the C4 arrows back. If you do a Rambo 6 Stallone, you probably won't. Please put the explosive arrows in there at the very least. But he suits up, ready for combat. And Rambo emerges from the shack, finding that Catalina and Rosario are gone. And Graciela, now speaking in unaccented English, tells him that she sent them down the highway. She tells him he should let the law handle the rest, and he realizes that there was no younger sister after all. She tells him that she's an FBI agent named Marcia partaking in a joint investigation with Mexican law enforcement. For years they've been trying to build a case against Teasel, and they now have a witness. Marcia wants Rambo to back down and let the law take care of it, as his place is a fortress, and he commands the local police like an army. Rambo responds with an impassioned speech, letting loose his frustrations with his past, and he talks about the previous movie's events, and he talks about how he could have prevented all of this if he had killed Teasel when he had the chance. He's determined to right that mistake now and hands her the car keys before leaving. And I am going to read this scene out because it is that damn good. Almost 25 years ago, I could have killed him and I didn't. Think of all the misery he's caused, all the shit he's done since then. And I could have prevented it if you don't know that. Don't I? Yes, quiet a beat. You know anything about me? Graciela shakes her head. No. This fat prick Teasel, I gave his town a little bit of a nose job, like I say, almost 25 years ago. But my ex-CO had some juice, so after they sent me to a federal penitentiary, they sprang me, said they could wipe the slate clean. Rambo was dead. Rambo was born again. All I had to do was go into Vietnam and take some pictures, prove that Ho Chi Minh was still holding some of our POWs. What happened? The government fucked me, because they didn't really want to find any POWs. It was all bullshit. Just like it is now. Only woman I ever cared about died in my arms over there. A little piece of jade on a thong, that's all I had left of her. And now what? Anybody talk about our POWs now? Hell no. We got golden arches in Ho Chi Minh City and we're all pals and everything's fine. It is as if 20 years of violence is coming up into him. He couldn't stop now, even if he wanted to. Then my CO, Colonel Troutman, comes and says we gotta help the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen. We gotta help them fight the Russians. And there was this little kid over there. His parents were killed. And for a second I thought, he ain't got no family. I ain't got no family. Maybe I could be like his father or something. His voice trails off as he remembers. That little piece of jade on the thong, I gave it to that kid for luck. He probably grew up to be one of the Taliban. He probably killed a bunch of Americans, or maybe a bunch of Americans killed him. And now the Mujahideen is the enemy, and we're pals with the Russians. Everything in the whole fucking world, everything I ever touched turned to shit. And every step of the way, I let the law handle it. I let the feds handle it. I let the government handle it. Well, fuck that. This time it will be different. You got that right. He reaches in his pocket and hands her the keys to the Dodge. Here's the keys to the Gar. You do what you gotta do. This time I'm gonna handle it. Fuck yes, that is so good. The way it actually refers back to the other movies and actually talks about how things in real life didn't go the way you think they would go after the events of the movies. Like, the whole concept of POW still being over there went away. The whole Afghanistan thing went completely sideways, and it makes total sense that Rambo would just be left lost and adrift by this. It's such a good speech, and I can just see Stallone completely just selling this to the audience and knocking it out of the park again. It's wonderful. It really is. And so now we go to Teasel, and it's actually kind of funny that we finally see Teasel in this script, and his first line is, "Son of a bitch." Yeah, we go to Teasel's hacienda in Santa Rosa, where he's visibly upset by learning that Rambo is back and after him, as the feds told him that Rambo had died in prison. He speaks to Dupree and the local police chief, Carl, and he tells Carl to mobilize all of his men and bring them there. So he has essentially his bring in everyone moment. And we then see the hacienda in its entirety backed up against the border fence and isolated from other buildings. There are 2 towers guarding the entrance, with some of Teasel's men are outfitting with a 30 caliber gun and a 50 caliber gun, respectively. A dozen cop cars, each occupied by 2 deputy sheriffs armed with AR-15s or riot guns, are also out front. So yeah, we're setting up some men to come in for Rambo to kill the shit out of. Marcia meets with her boss, Rick, who tells her that the fastest they can get the warrant is 24 hours. She says they don't have that long, but refrains from telling him about Rambo not wanting to be the latest person to betray him. And she then heads to the hotel where Rosario and Catalina are being kept for their safety. And Catalina asks if she betrayed Rambo, which this seems kind of redundant with the previous scene. But and it is there for a reason, which I'm not big on, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Back at Teasel's hacienda, everyone is prepared from the incoming attack, including the man himself, who is armed with a .45 and a shoulder holster and a riot gun nearby, and an AR-15 too. Rambo attacks, stealthily taking down 2 pairs of deputies with bolos and arrows before getting on the radio and threatening Teasel. So yeah, we're getting that give you a war you won't believe moment. Rambo then mounts something tall and readies the we don't see it quite yet. Readies the explosive arrows, taking out both towers with them. It's then revealed he took the giant D9 tractor from the construction site and sets it to roll towards the hacienda. He takes out squad cars and deputy with his explosive arrows as he goes, and even flattens one car off a tractor. And he takes one shot to a leg here. Teasel has Carl call up the highway patrol, and they get on their way. Marsha also is heading there. For some reason, she's bringing Rosario and Catalina with her. Like, why would you take your important witnesses with you to where you know there's going to be fucking gunfire and shit going down? Just that makes no sense to me. And speeds off with the red police light on when she sees the fire in the distance. And Rambo, after moving the rest of the squad cars out of the way, crashes the tractor into the house, and holy shit, that's awesome. Teasel shoots, hitting Rambo in the left shoulder, and runs for the border fence. He slips through a hole in the fence just as Marsha gets there, and she has the 2 women with her. Once again, why? He talks down to her as well as Catalina, and he calls her, the Virgin Mary, but not so much anymore, so he really is a prick in this. Saying they can't invade Mexico to get him, and that he has pulled down here. He basically says something along the lines of, what are you going to do, invade Mexico? I got juice down here, you stupid bitch. I gotta give credit to Dan Gordon, the way he writes these lines. I can just picture the Brian Dennehy line reading in my head. Like, I can totally see him pulling this off. Same with the Rambo dialogue. I can just hear Stallone's voice when I read the script. Like, it's that good. And that's when Rambo leaps over the border fence from a low adobe wall and tackles into Teasel. Teasel shoots him in the left arm and right leg, then drops the gun, saying he wants to finish him with his hands. Mistake. A knockdown, drag-out fight follows, which the script compares to the alley fight between Sean Connery and the one cop in The Untouchables, which I see what they're going for here, but I mean, it's like that on fucking crack, where they're just beating the shit out of each other. And Teasel, who threw away Rambo's Bowie knife, manages to crawl over to it. But before he can do anything with it, Rambo strangles him with a piece of barbed wire from the border fence. And Teasel begs for help, but Marsha's like, what are we going to do, invade Mexico? And Rambo strangles him to death, like, ugh! The highway patrol has arrived on the scene, and Rambo, lit up by one of their helicopters, gives Marsha one last look, knowing that he can't come back, and walks off into the night and into legend, and that's where it ends. And this script kicked fucking ass. It is amazing. It's one of my favorite scripts I've read for this show. It's easily the best of these 3 Rambo 4 things that I've got. Holy crap, this is the great unmade Rambo movie, and elements of it did make their way into Last Blood, and I can see why they didn't just take the script and make it into Last Blood, because it very much is a Rambo 4. Like, they would have to address, him coming home at the end of Rambo 4. They have to address that. And coming out in 2019, the discussion around, illegal immigration and the border and stuff like that, it's become very, very different since then. So you would have to rewrite that stuff pretty heavily as well, so I can see why they didn't just go with this version, but my God, is it amazing. It is the very best thing. Like, I can't say anything bad about, like, Rambo being portrayed as this almost legendary, iconic figure is awesome. And also, by the way, the ending is pretty similar to the ending of The Legend of Conan, the unproduced Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan movie, which I haven't done yet on the show. Very similar ending. This does it better. Rambo is just, the way Rambo is portrayed here, like, the action is amazing. The character stuff with him, like, the way he's, like, left adrift and how he has to, like, find his purpose again. Very well done. It's the only Rambo 4 thing that actually mentions Colonel Troutman, which is desperately needed because they just decided not to mention him at all for some reason after Richard Crenna died. I would have liked a little bit of a callback to him, because, I mean, the Rambo 4 that we got, they do that, like, dream sequence flashback thing, which weirdly enough uses the alternate ending of First Blood where Troutman shoots him, which that was always a strange choice to me, but it was cool seeing that. But it would have been nice to acknowledge the fact that he passed away in the movie. And this doesn't quite go that far either, but it would have been cool to do it. Bringing Teasel back works. Like I said, we need a little bit more development as to why he ended up the way that he did, as opposed to, it just says in the scene description, oh, he fell to the dark side long ago. It would have been nice to have a little introspective moment with him maybe before Rambo shows up and have him say, all those years ago I learned that I was that, all this law enforcement stuff that I believed in doesn't mean shit because he got carted away and I almost died and it showed me, you know, the way the world really is, something like that. And so he got carted away and sent to prison, and I never heard from him again. You know, just a little bit, just something to sort of solidify the direction the character went in a little more. But bringing him back is a cool idea for the last movie, because if this is the last movie, it reads like an ending. Like this is like the ending to the character. This is the epilogue of Rambo. It really does feel like that. And bringing back Teasel would be a great way to bookend it. And it's a shame they didn't make this. Now, would I trade it? Would I take it in place of the Rambo 4 we got? That is a very tough choice, because this is fantastic, but the Rambo 4 we got is fantastic as well. They're just very, very different. So that's a tough call to make. I couldn't possibly make it, but I would not have been unhappy if this was the Rambo 4 that was made at the time. The other two, I totally just go like, yeah, I'll take the Rambo 4 we got. No question, no contest whatsoever. This, it's like neck and neck. Like I couldn't possibly choose between the two. And as for the reason why this version didn't happen, from what I've read, Stallone said he really liked this storyline. He wanted Rambo to be more of a wanderer, to not have come home yet. And I feel like, and I definitely get where he's coming from with that. And that's what led to the Burma storyline. But man, could you imagine if they had made this? Like, I mean, damn, knowing Stallone, he would have rewritten it, and who knows if he would have made it better or made it worse, because he kind of did both with Last Blood. Man, this is such a missed up. It's crazy, because I love Rambo 4, or just Rambo, or John Rambo, but this Borderline script, it kind of makes me wish they did this. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It's such a conflict inside me with this. So yeah, in summary, Rambo Holy War, decent idea. I don't think the way they sort of set up the storyline in that script is necessarily the way to go about it, but I can see potential in that plot line. Homefront it's an okay script. It's not an awful thing, but it definitely worked. I haven't seen the Homefront movie yet, but I'm guaranteed that I would probably like the movie more than I like the script, because it just didn't feel particularly Rambo. It felt like some other story that they've kind of shoved Rambo into. So it's there. It exists. I didn't mind reading it. I didn't hate it, but it's not that great. Borderline, and it's a shame that I can't share this script, because it's one of those things where I want to shout to the rafters and tell people, this is the amazing Rambo script. Come read this thing. But it's one of those things, because of circumstances, I can't really share it with people, which is a shame. But it is brilliant. It is easily one of my favorite unproduced scripts I've read. One of my favorites I've covered for the show. It might even be in the top 5. This is a great script, and it's a shame. It's a shame they didn't make it, but it's also not a shame, because Rambo 4 is really good, and I'm just repeating myself now. So I feel like I can't top that amazing, amazing Dan Gordon Rambo Borderline script. So I've said about as much as I can. So until next time, bye.